So I know we're supposed to be obviously talking about Christmas, but I want to back up a little bit because we also just did another holiday, Thanksgiving. And several years ago, but long before we had kids or anything like that, and we were living down in Albuquerque, a group of friends, we all got together and we decided that we all realized none of us had anything to do for Thanksgiving. None of us had family that were going to be around or anything like that. And so we decided we would do Thanksgiving together. And this was before like Friendsgiving was a thing, right? Like it's a thing now, like to do Friendsgiving. Like that wasn't a thing then. But you like that one? A little 90s reference for you. All right. Well, we decided to do that, and we got to, and so we kind of got together and decided who was going to do what. And we were at one of our friends' house talking about it, and the topic came up of the guest list and who was going to be there. And one of the other folks there says, well, as long as it's going to be fine, so long as Carol doesn't come. Now, Carol isn't this actual person's name, because that would be unfair. But it basically sounds like, oh, okay, so fine as Carol doesn't come. And once that was said, my wife got very quiet. Very quiet. And started to look a little sheepish. And we're like, and eventually, a little bit later, had to admit to us that she didn't know that Carol wasn't on the invite list. Carol might have been invited already to what was going on and was really wondering what it is that she was supposed to bring. And immediately we were like, the response was, well, do you think you could uninvite her? I wonder if there's a way we could no, actually we decided not to have it. Right, and of course, this is a terrible response. By the way, don't do this. This is not a good example. And I bet even myself was a little bit grumpy, like, oh great, now we got to put up with this person. It's going to make the whole thing terrible. And of course, the time came, and lo and behold, it was fine. It was fine. Everybody was fine. Everybody had a good time. We enjoyed ourselves quite a lot. And actually, we probably learned a couple of things that made Carol a little more tolerable to be around. But the anticipation of it, the idea that there was this person coming that we didn't want to be there, who some of us, myself included, found rather, annoying. And we're like, man, I just don't want to put up with annoying people on Thanksgiving, right? That is a small version of what it is that we are dealing with in today's story. Now, most pastors will go their entire lives never preaching on the Syrophoenician woman because it's not a very good story, right? We don't like it. We don't like the Jesus we find in it. Jesus pretty much calls this woman a dog, which is probably not okay in most of our minds. We find it unsettling. If you have been around here for a while, it's actually the second time she came up. She was actually in our worship series a couple years ago, people you've probably never heard of in the Bible. And she was there because nobody preaches on her. So I guess I'm winning because I've now done it twice. But, hey. But the story is unsettling, right? I mean, it is unsettling. It's not the Jesus we expect to find, right? I mean, here comes somebody seeking healing. That's kind of his gig, right? It's sort of his deal. It's what he does. It's not an unreasonable expectation. So why is this woman being treated so different from everybody else who came to Jesus looking for the same thing? Now, there are some reasons. None of these are excuses. This story is unsettling, and it's supposed to be unsettling, and there's a point at which it really can't be unsettling, right? I think that's part of the point. It's also clear that we're never actually told exactly why. And this is a theme in the Bible. Things happen, and we're not told exactly why. There's some things we can read into it. There's some ideas we can develop. If we look at the context, there's tools we can use to unpack it a little bit. But at a certain point, it is what it is. It is there, and it does make us feel a little bit weird, or at least it should. That said, not by way of excuse, but there are some reasons why this is not super unexpected. First off, we are told very clearly where this is taking place. Now, this story actually shows up twice. It shows up in Matthew's version of the gospel, and it shows up in Mark's version of the gospel. We're reading Mark's version today. I think last time we used Matthew's version. It's not very different. But Mark is always interesting because if you look at your Bible, if you've never read a gospel before, Mark's a great one to start with because it's really short, right? Mark is the action-adventure gospel, right? He doesn't waste time. He doesn't waste words. His favorite word is immediately. right? He's like, this happened, and then immediately this happened, and then immediately this happened. If you read it front to back, you will hear that word over and over and over again. Mark doesn't mess around. He's just going to tell you the point, just the facts, ma'am. So, one of the facts that Mark chooses to include is where this takes place, and where this takes place is the city of Tyre. Now, Tyre is interesting for a lot of reasons. One, for where it is. If you kind of look at the map here, you can see where it is. One of the things interesting about it is it's on the coast, right? So it is not inland where Jesus spends pretty much the rest of his time. Those little green arrows there are where kind of Jesus spends his time. He spends most of his time inland because that's frankly where the Jews live. It's where God's people are. If you've noticed, especially in New Testament, but most of the Old Testament, there aren't a lot of seafaring stories in the Bible, right? Except for Jonah, and that doesn't go very well. Which is probably one of the reasons why there aren't a lot of them, is because, frankly, God's people, the Israelites, were not seafaring people. They lived inland. They lived near the Jordan River. They lived in the place. And because most of them were farmers, they grew stuff, right? At this point in time, when Jesus is around, the city of Tyre is a port city. So it's where things go to be shipped other places. That's its job. So you can kind of think about it like it's like Seattle, or Boston, or any of those sorts of places where stuff goes on ship to go elsewhere. And well, of course, if it's there, what's going on the ship to go elsewhere? Stuff they grew inland, right? So have you ever wondered why it is the Romans were so interested in this place? And they obviously were, right? We've talked about that a lot, the fact that the Romans are in charge, they want to stay in charge, even though the Israelites don't want them there and they don't want them to be in charge. The Romans are pretty intent on staying in charge, not because they have some great affinity for the area or it's a nice travel destination, though maybe it is, I don't know. They're interested in staying in charge because of what they grow there. Because the stuff that they grow there often doesn't stay there. It goes down the rivers and over the valleys and ends up in places like Tyre to be put on ships to go back to what we would now call like Greece and Italy and the places that were sort of the proper places in the Roman Empire. So first off, the fact that Jesus is even there, spending time there, is interesting. Obviously, and we're told at the beginning of the scriptures a reason why. Because he expects it to be quiet, right? Because this is not a Jewish city. It's not an Israelite city. It's not a place. Certainly there are people of his religious persuasion there, but they're not the dominant. It is a Gentile city. It's full of all sorts of people, mostly Romans, who are in the business of taking things from the central part and shipping it to the wealthy people out there. So you can kind of see the setup here, right? This is where the first century rural-urban divide collides, right? And we talk about that today. We think about that today, right? Somebody who grew up most of my life in eastern Montana, right? I know about being in a community that grows stuff and raises stuff that all goes somewhere else. Right? Today we have a word for this. We call it the extractive industries, right? And, we live in a part of the world where we grow a lot or we pull a lot of stuff out of the ground, but the stuff that we grow and the stuff that we pull out of the ground, most of it doesn't stay here. Most of it goes other places. I got in a big debate once with somebody. When you're in seminary, you have weird debates about things. Just going to tell you that. And I was talking about going home, and they're like, well, you enjoy all those freeways that the rest of us pay for in Montana. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You need those more than we do, right? Those aren't for us to drive on. Those are for the semi-trucks to be on to haul all of our stuff away to you. Let's be honest about how this works. Right? And this is kind of a story old as time, right? If you think about, the relationship between the southern states and the northern states in the beginning of the United States, right? The southern states is where they grew the cotton, the northern states is where they processed it and sent it away. Northern states got rich off of it. And these tensions have always existed, and they exist in the first century too. So when Jesus shows up in this place, he shows up as this person that has a reputation for being a teacher and has a reputation for being a healer, but he also shows up as a person with a reputation from being, from that backwater, from that inland place where the stuff comes from, but nobody actually wants to go. So Jesus is in Tyre, hanging out with the urban people. And then this woman shows up. This woman who shows up, who is not from where Jesus is from, but is from there. Syrophoenician isn't actually a specific place. It's a bit like saying Anglo-Saxon, right? It's more of like a genre or like a kind of a vague notion of a land rather than anywhere specific. But the detail is included to make sure that we know that she's from somewhere else, right? She is truly a Gentile. She is from somewhere else, but yet she has heard these stories and she shows up. And she shows up to ask Jesus for something important, not healing for herself, but healing for her daughter. Now, the fact that she kind of bursts into the room uninvited, at first it would be easy to say, well, there's a little bit of entitlement there, isn't it? Right? Like, you just showed up thinking you could, right? And from somebody from a rural background, well, I would expect that from a city person. So, apologize to all you city people. I'm as much a city person as I'm a rural person anymore. It doesn't, I can play both sides on that one. All right. But you would expect that. But then the scene immediately changes, right? And so she bursts into the room, but then she immediately falls to the floor. And she starts to make this request, this begging request of Jesus, not for herself, but for her daughter who she cares and loves. And you have to think for a moment there, how many of the other options must she have already exhausted at that point before she could end up in that place? Right? How many of the other the city healers and physicians and all that stuff has she already gone through before she arrives at this point where she's willing to humble herself in this way and ask this person that she's only ever heard of and is not sure who he is to do something that nobody else could do? Quite frankly, it's an amazing scene. And it's easy, though, in that scene to lose track of the one who's not there. And of course, the one that's not there is the daughter, right? The daughter who is so ill that she can't even travel and be brought along with. The daughter who this woman clearly loves so much, she's willing to go to these great lengths. Now, Jesus starts off not by saying, well, of course I'll do that for you, which is probably what we expect Jesus to do. And in fact, kind of a little bit of throwback here, Jesus starts off by scoffing at her. Didn't know we were going to use that word again, did you? That's basically what he does. He scoffs at her. He's like, are you kidding me? Like this, basically saying, I'm not here for you. I'm here for the people of Israel. Why are you asking me for this? And then, of course, the woman doesn't just take no for an answer. She has this amazing little refrain, right? She doesn't actually contest the idea. Basically, Jesus calls her a dog, which is as insulting then as it is today. It's still insulting. Jesus calls her a dog. She doesn't actually fight him on that point, but then turns the logic around on him and says, yes, but even the dog gets something. I'm just asking you for something. Now, when we look at this in isolation, just where we see it today, as we often do, we can lose track of something. And I've told you this before. It's always helpful to go back and see what just happened. What just happened before Jesus gets in this kind of back and forth match with the Syrophoenician woman. Before he was doing that, Jesus was tangling with his favorite people to tangle with, the Pharisees and the scribes, right? Jesus loves to pick a good fight with the Pharisees and the scribes. And they do, and they had just had this little altercation between Jesus and the Pharisees and the scribes where the Pharisees get mad at Jesus' disciples because they're not doing things the way they're supposed to do things. They're not washing their hands correctly before they eat food, right? And so Jesus kind of goes off on them a little bit and turns the tables on their logic. Basically, they pick a fight and Jesus wins, and often the way that he does. And then he has to go back and explain to the disciples what it is that just happened, and often the way that he does, because if you remember, the disciples are the B team. Good folks, and then we have this story. So basically, this exact scenario just happened. Jesus tangles with the Pharisees pick a fight, and Jesus wins by turning their logic around on them. And here this Syrophoenician woman, this outsider that's from that other place, that one that is nothing like the people that Jesus said he came for, basically pulls the same trick on Jesus. And Jesus says, for saying that, your daughter is healed. You may go. The woman came hoping for something. All she had when she entered that room was hope. Hope that maybe this was finally the person who could do the thing that nobody else seemed to be able to do. Finally, the hope that maybe this is the person that's going to let me or help me care for the one that I love. And that hope, frankly, was fairly irrational. And no doubt, if she had told all her city dweller friends what it is she was planning to do and who she was planning to go ask, they would have told her she was crazy. What good can come from those people up there? And yet she goes out of hope. A hope that is irrational and unreasonable, but hope nonetheless. Hope is an amazing thing. And unfortunately, because in the English language we really only have one word like hope, we tend to use it for a lot of stuff, right? We tend to, and most of the time when hope comes up in our conversations, it tends to be conversations like pretty casual, right? Somebody explains to you, this thing, I'm going to go do this thing, and you're like, I hope that works out for you. Do you really? Probably not, right? But we tend to use it in a pretty casual way. We love it. I mean, hope is probably like the second most popular word next to love, like on greeting cards, right? I mean, we use it, and when we use it in kind of our shallow, everyday way, we can forget that hope is actually something quite profound. And hope, the way that the Bible talks about it, hope in the way that Jesus offers it to us, is actually something very different than, hope you have a nice day. Right? The kind of hope that Jesus is talking about is the hope that changes things. It's fascinating right now because people are actually going back. There's this whole, for people who go and study human behavior, there's this whole wave of it happening right now where people are actually going back to study things about human behavior that, quite frankly, people have known for thousands of years. And one of the things that people of faith have known for thousands of years that scientists are figuring out today is that hope is important. And one of the places you see a lot of this is in medicine. There is a gal, Wendy Harpel, MD. She wrote a book called Healing Hope. And she herself had gone through cancer treatment. And I like this stuff. So. I'm going to pick on doctors today. Let's see. Sorry, Bill. But, most of us who think about doctors, this is probably what we think of. And when I started first having to go to the doctor as an adult, I've had to navigate type 2 diabetes for the last 20 years. When I first had to do that, I realized very quickly that my doctor would be like, yeah, that stinks for you, do it anyway. It's pretty much the response you got to a lot of stuff. It's improved dramatically in the last 20 years. But Wendy, in her book, Healing Hope, having been both a physician treating people, but also on the other side of it as a cancer patient herself, shared some learnings in that book. And one of the quotes I really liked, she says, I learned that hope helps patients by motivating them to action when there's something they can do, and by helping them wait when there's nothing they can do. Hope helps motivate us to action when there's something we can do, and helps us wait when there's nothing we can do. And the truth is, those are the times when I think we need hope the most, right? When there's something that we see we want to have happen, that we need to have happen, there's healing we're looking for, there's reconciliation we're looking for, there's forgiveness we're looking for, or something we want to do, hope helps us have the energy and the effort to stick to it and just keep going. And the kind of profound hope that Jesus talks about is the hope that helps us in the waiting, help us in those times when we know something is happening but there's nothing we can do about it. Helping them wait when there's nothing they can do, and motivating them to action. Last year, in the journal Global Epidemiology, which I'm sure we all read, the internet is great. You find all kinds of stuff in there. In the November issue, they had a great article called The Role of Subsequent Health and Well-Being for Older Adults, an Outcome-Wide Longitudinal Approach. My wife, who's a PhD student in nursing, knows exactly what all that means. I have no idea. All right. But the synopsis of the article basically said this. They did a study in the way that, people who do studies, and with all the controls and everything that they do. And after they talk about all the ways that they went about it and all the stuff I don't understand about how these studies work, they gave a synopsis of what it is they found. A greater sense of hope is associated with better physical health, health behavior outcomes, fewer number of chronic conditions, lower risk of cancer, fewer sleep problems, higher psychological well-being, increased positive effect, increased life satisfaction, increased sense of purpose in life, and lower psychological distress and better social well-being. To which all people of faith say, well, duh. We've known that for years, right? I mean, what else are we doing here other than coming to find some hope? Why else would we take time every Sunday in the holy act of listening we practice, where we lift up our joys and concerns for one another, right? So we can join one another. And why else would we have a prayer chain where we pray for one another? We do all of that out of hope, right? Hope that we can take action where we can, and hope that we can traverse those times when we are asked to wait. The story today is an awkward story of illogical hope. And the truth is, that's what Christmas is about. Christmas is about the time we have. Christmas is about the hope for the time we have here. Christmas is about the hope for the life we have here. Christmas is also about the hope we have in the life to come. That even when those things come, that at the end, for us or those we love, that we truly can't do something about, we recognize that our hope doesn't exist only here. Our hope exists in what will come next. Christmas is a time when we can get caught up in the busyness and the joy of the season, and there is so much joy in the season. But we would be dishonest with ourselves and dishonest with each other if we didn't also recognize Christmas is not only a time where we recognize what we have. Christmas is a season where we also remember what we have lost and the people that we have lost. And we should all be very honest with each other that is part of what we will all go through together. And so the hope that we find here today, the hope we find in the season, can't just be about the here and now. It can't just be about what's under the tree. It's got to be about something more important than that and more than that. It's the hope we have for the time we have. And it's the hope we have for what comes next, for us and for our loved ones. When I think about this, I can't help, in these days, to thinking about my father-in-law. So in 2014, when my father-in-law was being treated for one form of cancer that was going very well, all the tests they were running for that unfortunately uncovered another kind of cancer that he would then do battle with for a couple of years. In the summer of 2019, he threw himself a birthday party. And honestly, I had never known Dan to have people over. Really. They were not people who entertained my in-laws, but Dan decided he wanted to have this really big birthday party and invite everybody down. And so, of course, we came to Miles City and visited with them. And, of course, here's Vivian, entertaining her grandpa. I have lots of pictures of Vivian entertaining people, at this party. And he called me up and he's like, would you barbecue for it? And I'm like, absolutely, that's the best thing you can ask me to do. So we sat around and we had a great time. We had great food. Lots and lots of people came. We enjoyed our company with one another, and we spent several hours, outside in the backyard, just having a good old time, until the point when suddenly we realized, well, Dan wasn't there anymore. And of course, what had happened is he'd gone downstairs to take a nap because he had used up at that point all of the energy that he had. He gave it all. So he went downstairs to take a nap, and we all said polite goodbyes to everybody and picked up the party and all that sort of stuff. The next day, as we were leaving to go back home, Dan asked me, he said, when do you think you're next going to come back? And I'm like, well, I'm hoping too soon. And he said, if you do come back, I'd like you to come back because I'd like to take Gavin down to the range. Gavin had just passed 100 safety, and we had gone shooting a couple of times, and he enjoyed it. And Gavin had talked to Dan about that during the birthday party, but they had not had a chance to go yet. So he very much wanted to go with his grandson down to the range. I said, okay, we'll come back. So we came back right at the beginning of August, about a month and a half later, on the hottest day. And if you haven't been in an eastern Montana hot day, you just don't know, right? This was a hot day by eastern Montana standards. We show up, and I'm like, Dan, do you still want to do this? At this point, he wasn't doing any treatments or anything anymore. And he's like, oh, yeah, I still want to go. I'm like, okay. So we loaded up the car. We went down to the range. And this is how we spent most of the time. I don't think he shot more than twice himself, but he spotted for Gavin and gave pointers to Gavin and really just showed him how to do what he knew how to do, and let him try different things and play little games and do the things that you do and what a grandfather and a grandson do in these situations. And we were there for a long time, longer than I honestly thought we ought to be there. And we really only left once all the water was gone, and we realized we probably needed to. And of course, so we packed up. Dan was all smiles on the way home, and immediately went home and took a nap. We lost Dan about a month and a half later. Dan, he didn't have a lot of time that summer, but he had a lot of hope for the time he had. He didn't have a lot of time, but he had a lot of hope for the time he had. He wanted to spend it a certain way, and we all did our best to help him do that. And because of that, our memories of him are memories of these. Time spent well, time where love was shared, time filled with hope. Christmas is a season of hope. Christmas is the time that we remember the source of the greatest hope of all, the one who gives us hope for the time we all have. But not just that, hope for the time to come. So while when we get to every Christmas and we tell stories about Dan and all the other crazy things that he did, and he did some crazy stuff, we don't just find hope in the time we spent together. We have hope in where he is now, in a place where there is no more pain. Let's all be honest with each other and honest with ourselves this season, and the hope that we are looking for. The hope we are looking for that is serious and real. The hope that we are looking for that is far more than Hallmark could ever put on a card. The real and honest hope. The hope for the time we have, and the hope for the time to come. It may seem irrational to some. It may seem unreasonable to others. It may seem as silly as that woman bursting through the door of a house she'd never been to talk to somebody she'd never seen, hoping against hope to find the healing that she wants for the one she cares for the most. We are invited this time to have that sort of irrational, unreasonable hope, the hope that only comes at Christmas. Amen.